My boss fired me for overstepping after I saved a $3 million contract. No warning, no thank you, just a cold message and an HR packet. But here's what they didn't expect. The emails started pouring in, from clients, from partners, even from people inside the company. And once that happened, everything changed. My name is Ian, and if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be let go not for failing, but for solving the very crisis everyone else was avoiding, I probably would have laughed. I wasn't reckless. I didn't cut corners. I didn't embarrass the company or go rogue. I just acted when no one else would. That's what's still hard to understand. It started 6 months before everything unraveled. We had a client, a large logistics firm, that was the cornerstone of our quarterly projections. If their contract renewed, it meant stability, continued work, and a lot of peace of mind for several departments. If it didn't, the gap it would leave behind would be nearly impossible to patch up in time. Everyone knew it, but no one said it out loud. For weeks, there were red flags, missed meetings, delayed responses, rumblings from our contacts that their leadership was exploring options. I raised these concerns during our Friday team calls, but the response was always the same. Let's not panic. Or worse, they've been like this before. It'll sort itself out. It didn't sit right with me. This wasn't the usual client behavior. I had been working with them for 4 years. I'd seen their cycles. This wasn't cyclical. It was intentional. They were stepping back, quietly. So I dug, not behind anyone's back, just in between meetings, over coffee, after hours. I reread our last 12 months of correspondence. I looked through delivery reports. I even called our support team to ask how many tickets their team had submitted in the past quarter. What I found wasn't shocking. It was just clear. They were unhappy. Delays, poor communication, half-resolved issues that no one followed up on. Nothing catastrophic, but enough small cuts to bleed out a relationship. I documented everything. Put together a simple 2-page brief. I brought it up again on a Monday check-in. I remember the silence after I finished, a few nods, a half-hearted thanks for flagging. Then the topic shifted to onboarding a new project with a tech startup that, in my opinion, wouldn't last 6 months. After the call, I was pulled aside. "Ian, it's good that you're proactive," I was told. "But don't make this your fight. That account is under the client success group. They'll handle it." I remember walking out of that conversation, staring at the elevator numbers lighting up and thinking, what do you do when someone's handling it by not handling it? So I made a choice. I called the client. Not to escalate, not to go around anyone, just to ask for 15 minutes of their time to understand what we'd missed. I spoke with one of their senior managers. We talked candidly. No slides, no sales pitch, just one professional to another. He confirmed what I already suspected. Delays, poor communication, a few patchy resolutions. But more importantly, they didn't feel like we valued the relationship anymore. They said we felt distant, like we were already eyeing the exit before they had made any decisions. That stuck with me. I thanked him. Told him I appreciated the honesty. Then I went to work. I didn't promise anything I couldn't deliver. I just went, department by department, quietly and directly. Support. Operations technology. I asked questions, logged tickets, closed loops, followed up. I didn't ask for permission because no one wanted to talk about the issue anymore. They had mentally moved on. In less than 2 weeks, we'd turned around every unresolved thread. I compiled a summary, showing what had been fixed, what was in motion, and what we'd do differently. I sent it to the client directly, not through a presentation, just an email, personal, clear, respectful. The next day I got a reply, They weren't just staying, they were renewing. And not just renewing, they were expanding. The contract was now worth $3.1 million over 18 months. I was stunned. Not because it happened, but because of how easily it could have been lost. Over silence, over pride. I didn't go around boasting. I just shared the news during the next leadership sync. My direct manager didn't even look surprised, just said, "Good to know," and moved on. 2 days later, I got a calendar invite. No subject, just 10 minutes, required. HR was there. "Ian, this is about your recent involvement with the logistics client," she said. "We've had some concerns raised about boundary overreach." Overreach? You acted without formal coordination. Several team members felt bypassed. There's a process in place for client escalations. "I understand that," I replied calmly, but no one was escalating. I asked for a short conversation, and I addressed the issues internally. I didn't promise them anything outside our capability. "That may be," she said, "but the perception was different." And that word stuck with me. Perception. Perception became more important than action, than outcome, than keeping the client. She handed me a printed document, my termination details, severance, an NDA. I read every line, slowly. Not because I thought it would change anything, just because I wanted to remember how it felt. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I thanked her for the clarity, stood up, and walked out. That night I didn't sleep much, not out of anger, just disbelief. I had worked there for nearly 7 years. I wasn't perfect, but I showed up. I did the hard things. I asked hard questions. And when no one else wanted to act, I acted. Quietly, professionally, and still, I became a problem. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my personal inbox, and there it was, an email from the client, then another, and another. 3 people from their executive team reached out within 24 hours, all asking the same thing. What happened? Then came the messages from our own teams, people who had quietly seen the work, respected it, and were now wondering how this could happen. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't trying to start a fire. But I could feel something shifting. I didn't leave angry. I left with my spine straight, knowing I did what needed to be done, and that somewhere along the way, doing the right thing quietly became the wrong kind of attention. I didn't plan on responding to anyone right away. After I walked out of that building, I needed time to think. Not to strategize, just to feel everything for what it was. My termination wasn't a surprise, not entirely. The way it was handled, the reasons they gave, those things still rattled around in my head. But I wasn't bitter. I was just done pretending. Pretending that playing it safe always keeps you safe. That if you follow the system will protect you. The client emails were respectful, confused, but respectful. One wrote, "Ian, I heard what happened. I'm not sure I understand. If this is true, it's disappointing. You were the reason we stayed. Can we talk?" Another said, "I don't mean to overstep, but what happened on your end?" Your follow-through was the only reason this new contract even got off the ground. It felt surreal, getting let go for solving a problem, then getting thanked for solving it by the people it actually mattered to. I didn't respond for 2 days. Then I wrote one email, carefully. "Hi, first thank you. I want you to know how much I appreciated working with your team. I'm proud of the work we did together. As for what happened, the short version is I took initiative at a time when many believed things should stay within lanes. I didn't breach trust, I just acted. Some viewed that as overstepping. I accept their decision and have moved on with clarity and peace. I'm around if you ever want to talk further." Best, Ian. That email didn't start a fire. But it opened a door. Within 48 hours, 2 of their executives scheduled calls with me. Not to gossip, but to ask about my availability. They wanted to know if I'd ever consider consulting independently. One of them said they had upcoming projects that needed a more accountable touch. The other just said, "We trust people who take things personally, in a good way." I didn't commit. I wasn't ready. But something inside me shifted. I started revisiting my old notebooks. I had always documented things, ideas, risks, moments I knew would matter later. I looked through all of them. Patterns started to emerge, not just in that one incident, but across years. Initiative always came with quiet consequences. There was the time I proposed a systems revamp that would have cut manual processes by half. Everyone agreed it was smart, but it got shelved because the person in charge of the existing system wasn't ready. I was told to leave it alone. Then, the incident last year, I flagged a compliance lapse that, if left unresolved, could have triggered a serious fine. Instead of fixing it immediately, leadership scheduled a future task force. When I pushed back, I was told I was too focused on risk. Over time, I had learned to bite my tongue, but this time, I didn't, and it cost me the badge. But now, I was wondering what else it had bought me. I started getting more messages. People I hadn't spoken to in months, even years, were reaching out. "Hey, I heard what happened. You okay? You were one of the good ones. You deserved better. This company's been punishing the wrong people for a long time. You just got caught doing what others won't." I didn't let it go to my head, but I paid attention. Not because I needed sympathy, but because I was starting to see how many people felt the same tension. Stuck between doing what's right and doing what's safe, between acting and waiting, and how often the ones who act are quietly removed so everyone else can keep pretending it's all working. I kept thinking about something the client said during one of our calls. When we're choosing who to work with, we look for someone who acts like the results matter to them, not just to the spreadsheet. That line stayed with me, so I made a decision. Not big and dramatic, just real. I wasn't going to chase job listings. I wasn't going to put on a brave face and take another internal role somewhere just to play politics again. I was going to see if people actually meant what they said when they told me they respected the way I worked. I drafted a short one-pager, not a resume, just a service brief. Simple. Strategic operations support for companies who want the job done right. I offered contract-based reviews, internal operations audits, and client retention analysis. Nothing fancy, no fluff. Just what I knew how to do and how I did it, with ownership, with honesty, and without dragging it through 10 layers of protocol. I sent it to 5 people. 3 responded within the day. 2 asked for calls. 1 signed a short-term agreement before the week ended. It wasn't about the money, though I won't lie, it felt good seeing value attached to work that once got me dismissed. What struck me more was how natural it felt. No politics, no presentation theater, just solving the problems that were right there in front of us, the way I always had, but this time on my own terms. A week later, I got a call from someone inside my old company. She worked in operations and had always been straight with me. She said, "You didn't hear this from me, but things are tense. That client you saved? They're asking very pointed questions. Leadership's scrambling to figure out how to explain your exit. Your name's come up more in the past 2 weeks than in the past 2 years." I didn't ask for details. I just listened. Then I thanked her and hung up. I wasn't surprised. You can remove a person. You can edit their name out of the slide deck, but you can't hide the results. Especially when the person you fired was the only reason you still had a contract on paper. I started keeping a folder, Not out of ego, but to stay grounded. Emails from clients, testimonials, a couple of thank you notes, feedback from the work I was now doing on my own. I wanted to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that there was value in caring too much, that acting too early was sometimes better than reacting too late. And then, something unexpected happened. One morning, I got an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in over 3 years. He used to be a director at a company we partnered with. He had moved on to a new venture, a healthcare systems startup with tight processes and big goals. He said, "Ian, heard what happened?" Sounds about right, sadly. We're building a team that values straight shooters and actual doers. Any interest in advising a few of our ops leads? We need someone who sees things before they break. It wasn't flattery. It was a lifeline, but not in the way most people think. It wasn't about getting back in the game. I never left. It was about realizing the game I had been playing all those years was stacked wrong. It rewarded compliance more than clarity, delay more than decisiveness, appearances more than integrity, and when someone flipped the script quietly, without ceremony, it embarrassed the system enough to push them out. But outside that system, there were others watching. People who still wanted results more than explanations. People who didn't need 12 signatures to do what was right. That's where I found myself now. Still standing, still quiet, still moving forward, just not under anyone else's ceiling. And that's when I got the call I didn't expect. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once, twice. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. It was the client, the original one. The $3 million contract. The one I had overstepped to protect. He didn't waste time. "Ian," he said, "we need to talk, off the record." I stepped outside, walked slowly up the sidewalk. It was early, the kind of morning where the sun hasn't quite committed yet, still quiet. "Go ahead," I said. He sighed, not out of frustration, out of exhaustion. "They've tried to explain your exit a few different ways," he said. "None of it holds up. First, they said you moved on. Then they said it was a departmental restructure. And now, someone's floating this idea that you created friction with internal teams." I didn't say anything. "I'm not calling to dig," he continued. "I just want to be honest. If you hadn't stepped in when you did, we would have pulled the deal. There was too much at stake. You knew that. You acted. We saw it. And now that you're gone, we're seeing how thin everything is without you." I looked up at a window across the street, reflections of a sky still deciding between gray and blue. He asked the question I knew was coming. "Would you be open to coming in as an independent?" "Not tied to them, just us." I asked for time to think. He agreed. "Take your time, but not too much. We're making decisions in the next week." When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt still. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very action that got me fired had turned into the reason I was now in demand. But it wasn't revenge I was feeling. It was validation. Quiet, honest validation. I didn't accept his offer right away. I sat with it. I weighed the pros and cons like I always had. Not just about the money or title, but about the structure. Would I be walking right back into a version of what I'd just escaped? I called him the next morning and asked one question. "If I take this on, I need full visibility, no red tape, no halfway permissions. Do I have that?" He didn't hesitate. "You'll have what you need, that's the whole point." So I said yes. Just like that, I was back in, but this time on my own terms. No internal politics, no layers of approval. Just the work and the clarity to do it right. It started small. I reviewed their rollout documentation. I mapped the risk points. The same cracks I saw before were now bigger, deeper, and easier to spot. They'd already had one minor breach of protocol. It hadn't hit the news. But if it had gone unaddressed another few weeks, it might have. I fixed it within 3 days. Word got around. Other departments started asking for reviews. Quietly at first, no one wanted to step on toes. But by week 2, I was fielding calls from teams I hadn't even worked with directly. One of them said, "You don't sugarcoat. We need more of that." Another, "I don't care that you're not internal anymore. You get it done." It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was real. And meanwhile, I heard things, soft rumors from people still inside my old company. Apparently, leadership had pulled together a task force to rebuild trust with key clients. New presentations, new lingo, new org charts. None of it addressed the core problem. Because the problem was never the structure, it was the culture. A culture that punished action and rewarded delay. That saw initiative as rebellion. That pushed out people who made things work because their results made others uncomfortable. One night, about 3 weeks into the new role, I got an email. Subject line, "Just so you know." It was from someone still inside. Someone who kept a low profile but knew how things really ran. The message was short. They're realizing they let the wrong person go. Not because of public fallout. Because they're starting to see what you kept from falling apart. Quietly, every day. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. I didn't feel pride. I felt something closer to peace. Like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. But peace didn't mean I was done. A month in, I proposed a structural overhaul to the client. A way to prevent future near misses by embedding cross-functional decision checkpoints. Not committees, just clarity. One person in each vertical empowered to make the call when things turned urgent. They agreed. We launched the pilot. And within 2 months, efficiency improved by 22%. No applause, no newsletter announcement, just results. That's when the second call came, from a firm in another city. Someone I'd crossed paths with briefly at a strategy conference 3 years earlier. He remembered my name. He had heard I was out. "We're not trying to poach you," he said, "but we've got a blind spot, and I think you know how to look at these things without politics. Interested?" At that point, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. Being let go wasn't the end, it was the turning point. Because for the first time, I wasn't proving my worth inside a system that barely recognized it. I was solving real problems, not filtered through layers of self-preservation. I took on that second project, then a third. And each time, I kept things simple. No branding, no buzzwords, just what I'd always done. See what's broken, fix what matters, document it cleanly, move on. A few weeks later, someone inside my old company reached out again. Different tone this time. "Would you ever consider returning? Leadership is rethinking a few things." I paused, then replied, "Respectfully, no. But I'm open to helping from the outside, if the goal is results. Nothing political, just clean work." I never heard back. That told me all I needed to know. Some systems don't want to be fixed. They want to maintain the illusion of control. Even as control slips through their fingers. That's fine. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just, finally, clearly, done. And then one day, something small but telling happened. I walked into a new client's office, a healthcare logistics group facing delays in critical shipments. I'd been brought in to audit their fulfillment process. The director shook my hand and said, "You come highly recommended. They said you're the guy who got fired for doing the right thing." I smiled. Sounds about right, I said. He laughed. Honestly, that's exactly why we hired you. 6 months passed, quietly, smoothly, without the firestorms I'd grown used to. I had no office now, just a small rented space with a plain desk and a whiteboard. Some days I worked from home. Some days from a client site. No assistants, no layers between me and the work. I used to think status came with a title. But now I knew better. Status is being trusted to solve hard problems and being invited back after you do. The healthcare logistics project ended ahead of schedule. For the first time in over a year, their supply chain metrics were green across the board. The director emailed me a single line. Wish we'd met a year ago. I didn't need anything more than that. It was around then that I started getting more of those messages. Referrals from people I hadn't worked with directly, but who'd heard about how I operated. They didn't ask for a resume. They asked for availability. And something else started happening too. People who'd once kept their distance were now reaching out not as colleagues but as peers, asking for advice, a second set of eyes, a read on a tough situation. One evening, I got a message from a former teammate, one of the quiet ones who'd stayed behind when I was let go. She said, "They're still trying to recreate what you built, but they're missing the point. It wasn't a system, it was how you made decisions when no one else wanted to be accountable." She ended the note with, "I left last week. Starting somewhere new. Thanks for showing me how to stay steady when things went sideways." I sat with that one for a while. I didn't respond right away, I just let it land. Because that was the difference now. I wasn't rushing to prove anything. I wasn't chasing promotions or trying to stay ahead of some invisible curve. I was present, clear. About a week later, I walked into a client meeting. It was a manufacturing company, family-owned, scaling fast, struggling with their first real wave of operational chaos. The owner pulled me aside after the walkthrough. "I read about you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know I'd made headlines." He smiled. "Not in the press, through the grapevine. Word is, you called out a critical issue, took action, saved a major deal, and got canned for it." I nodded. "That's mostly true." He crossed his arms, looking me over. "Look, I don't know how big you're planning to take this thing you're doing. But if you ever get tired of jumping from project to project, I'd like to talk about something more permanent." I appreciated the offer, but I knew the answer. "No offense," I said. "But I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He didn't take it personally. He nodded like he understood something without needing it spelled out. As I walked out, I realized I hadn't thought about my old title in weeks, maybe months. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was something simpler, cleaner. I got to wake up every day and tell the truth. I got to do the work that needed to be done, not just the work that checked boxes. And I got to help people who actually wanted to be helped, not just cover for leadership afraid of real accountability. That was the real shift. Not just in my career, in my identity. Because when I was inside that system, I thought survival meant keeping your head down, following the script, keeping the politics quiet and the calendar full. But now I knew different. Real security doesn't come from staying silent. It comes from being known, reliably, for doing what's right, even when it's not popular. One day, in my little office with the whiteboard, I printed out a simple phrase and taped it to the wall. If doing the right thing costs you your job, it was never the right job. I don't use it as a slogan. I don't post it online. It's just there, a reminder. The kind you look at on hard days. The kind that grounds you when offers come in that look shiny but feel off. The kind that lets you walk into any room, any meeting, any storm, and know exactly who you are, without having to say it twice. Eventually, I hired a second consultant, then a third. I didn't look for stars. I looked for quiet professionals who didn't mind asking hard questions. We kept it small, intentional. We didn't market much, we didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. And one day, as I was wrapping up a long week, I got an email from someone I hadn't thought about in a while. My former boss, the one who let me go. Subject line, "Hope you're well." I hovered over it for a second before opening it. I've been meaning to reach out. Things have been challenging. I see now that your instincts on that account were right. I didn't handle that well, and I regret how it played out. If you're open to reconnecting, I'd like to have a conversation. I stared at the screen for a while, not angry, not smug, just clear. I closed the laptop. I didn't need a conversation. Not because I held a grudge. I didn't, but because I was no longer part of that system, the one that punished clarity and rewarded caution, masquerading as strategy. Some lessons don't need to be relearned, and sometimes the best closure is no longer needing one. I poured myself a coffee and stepped outside. The air was still, crisp. I looked out at the skyline, not searching, just noticing. I thought about where I started. The things I tolerated, the battles I chose not to fight, the ones I did. And now? I didn't have a title, I didn't have a corner office, but I had something better, a reputation that was earned, and peace that didn't need defending. That was enough. That was more than enough.